Presiding Officer, last year the then Health Secretary promised no one would be waiting more than 18 months for an NHS procedure by September 2023. But the most recent figures show there are still 17,200 people on an NHS waiting list who have already waited over 18 months for hospital procedures. Yet another broken promise from a Health Secretary that has failed upwards. The result? People turning to private care. Figures out this week show 40% of all knee and hip replacements being carried out in Scotland are being self-funded by patients. 40%. Why does Humza Yousaf think it's acceptable that almost 5,000 patients last year were forced to cover the costs of their hip or knee replacements because of his failures?
First Minister.
First of all, Anas Sarwar, of course, has every right to ask around the waiting times that our NHS are experiencing. But what I would say to Anas Sarwar is every time he asks the question, he fails to mention, of course, the biggest shock our NHS has ever faced in its 75-year existence. And health services right across the UK, including in Scotland, are, of course, ensuring that we recover. When it comes to the longest waits, again, just to inject some facts into this exchange. When we look at the two-year waits, the number waiting over 2 years for a new outpatient appointment is down 59% in Scotland. When we look at the 18-month wait, it's reduced by 40.6%. We look at those waiting over a year, 34% of specialities had fewer than 10 patients waiting over 52 weeks. So there is progress, there is recovery, and of course that recovery is going to take time. And what, of course, helps with that recovery is making sure that we have NHS staffing at near record levels, as they are under this government, but also making sure that we don't lose a single day of the NHS to industrial action. I'm pleased that this Scottish Government has ensured that our NHS staff remain the best paid in the entire UK.
Anas Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, surely the First Minister knew about COVID when he made the promise last year that be eradicated by this time this year. The First Minister may not like it, but this is happening on his watch. In the last financial year alone, there were 43,000 patients treated privately in Scotland, an 8% increase in 1 year. 4,739 hip and knee replacements paid for privately. 7,805 cataract surgeries paid for privately. 1,980 colonoscopies. 2,055 endoscopies. 995 hernia repairs. And most shockingly of all, 1,745 rounds of chemotherapy paid for privately by patients. Healthcare free at the point of need, a founding principle of our NHS. How can the SNP have let it get so bad that patients are having to find the cash to pay for life-saving cancer treatment?
First Minister.
Of course, Presiding Officer, we don't want people to have to fund care out of their own pockets. We know, of course, the impact that the pandemic has had on our health service and indeed on those waiting lists. But I go back to the point to Anas Sarwar that this is something that is being seen right across health systems across the globe, let alone across the UK. So when we look at those happening here in Scotland as well as across the UK, when I look at the figures from the Private Health Information Network over the first quarter of 2023, of course it shows worrying trends in relation to those who are accessing private healthcare, but it does also show that Scotland has a lower rate of take-up of private healthcare compared to England and Wales. The rate of people who are self-funding for private inpatient daycare is 16% higher in England, and in Wales it's 51% higher, where the Labour Party are in charge. And of course that will be cold comfort for people that have to dig deep into their own pockets to pay for healthcare. But what I would say is it's not unique here to Scotland. So what we'll do is continue to see that recovery, continue to reduce waiting lists, and what we will continue to do is make sure that our NHS staff are the best paid in the UK, so they continue to provide the excellent service that they do to patients up and down Scotland.
Anas Sarwar.
The number of people going private each year is going up, and those answers from the First Minister are going to be no comfort to the 43,000 patients who are being forced to pay privately. One person I spoke to in Cambuslang just a few weeks ago, £15,000 for a hip replacement because he had to wait 3 years. Completely and utterly unacceptable. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, when people are struggling to pay the bills, they shouldn't also have to worry about the cost of getting sick. But on the SNP's watch, 43,000 Scots are being forced to find £15,000 for a hip or knee replacement, £3,000 for cataract surgery, £3,000 for a colonoscopy, £4,000 for a hernia repair, and even cancer patients forced to find thousands of pounds for their chemotherapy. Patients in pain and heartbroken families trying to scrape together the cash, some even being forced to remortgage their homes to pay for the care they should be getting on the NHS. First Minister, why are more and more Scots being forced to pay the price for SNP incompetence and failure?
First Minister.
What we're seeing, of course, is the impacts of that global pandemic, which has impacted every single health service, including, of course, the health service here in Scotland. But if you want evidence, if Anas Sarwar, forgive me, wants evidence of the recovery, we are seeing more and more activity within the NHS. When I look at the activity in relation to inpatient daycare, the activity for Q2 was at its highest since the start of the pandemic. That's not the first, not the second, but actually the sixth quarterly increase in a row, with 58,813 patients seen in Q2. So we're seeing more and more patients, inpatients in this case, and daycare patients being seen. I'm pleased that Anas Sarwar mentioned the cost of living crisis, because we are taking action to tackle that cost of living crisis. Because of the action we are taking, of course, it's estimated that 90,000 fewer children will be in absolute or relative poverty, in stark contrast to the position of Anas Sarwar of a summer of U-turns, where he has aligned himself with cruel Tory policy after cruel Tory policy. Now, we are unashamedly anti-poverty, unashamedly pro-growth. The only thing Anas Sarwar is unashamedly pro-Starmer, Presiding Officer.